Llewellyn King here in Washington, co-host of MECFS Alert, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jonathan Shurberg, who is a gastroenterologist who practices in Northern Virginia and who has some very interesting views of possible linkages between chronic fatigue syndrome and irritable bowel syndrome. Linkages that I have not heard before. John, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Llewellyn.
What is your theory here?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert on chronic fatigue syndrome.
But you are on irritable bowel.
On irritable bowel, and I have several purposes in being on this show with you today, and I'm going to need the audience's help.
But before we get to that, which we will, just tell those of us who don't know what irritable bowel is and what its manifestations are.
Well, the functional or irritable bowel disease is it can be diarrhea, abdominal pain, cramps, constipation, and such. I'm not really linking them, but during my investigation of irritable bowel disease, I've made some observations that spill over to chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's what I want to bring about, or to talk about.
And you want to ask the audience where they have found confirmation of your thesis,
Let me develop a little premise here and present it to you and to the audience, and let's see where it goes. First of all, my expertise being a gastroenterologist in irritable bowel disease is that I've basically not used the diagnosis of irritable bowel disease in 36 years of practice. I have a pathology background. I was able to empty the wastebasket as such for that diagnosis. I was able to find that if I pathologically correlated my clinical patients with their symptoms, with the pathology I found on rectal biopsies, I was first able to find lesser degrees of inflammation or lesser types of colitis that could be treated with a standard therapy, anti-inflammatory. And I was left with less in the wastebasket and easier to decipher very quickly. The constipation features, particularly in women, with a slant in that direction, were more related to mechanical issues that you get with scarring from hysterectomies, tubal ligations, ovarian cysts, etc., and easily recognized by gastroenterologists when they do colonoscopies, getting around corners and such. That certainly gave the female bias and answers to other of their symptoms. So they're mechanical. Others are well recognized with lactose intolerance and other sorbitol fructose intolerances, and you start emptying the wastebasket and you get to fewer and fewer patients. Along the way, I found patients that were arriving in my office that were labeled by other physicians as chronic fatigue syndrome. And in emptying the wastebasket as I was doing with my approach with the patients, I listened to the patients, and they would tell me at times that they were exposed to various agents that caused or worsened their symptoms, and I became more and more cognizant of the fact that volatile hydrocarbons, toluene diisocyanate, but basically fumes that you can smell in polyurethane, fingernail polish.
These are relatively recent
propellants.
Introductions into the environment, aren't they?
That's the thing, that these are new chemicals that the organism, the human organism, hasn't been exposed to for millions and millions forever. And some people react to these exposures, these chemicals, with their immune system differently than others, a sensitivity, so to speak. And what I was finding, and this is a very small segment of irritable bowel, functional bowel disease, and really you can forget everything I say about irritable bowel, functional bowel. It's just the notion of a wastebasket diagnosis that I'm transferring to chronic fatigue syndrome. And what I found with the volatile hydrocarbons being at least some subsegment of the population of chronic fatigue syndrome. I don't know how large a subsegment, and that's what I'm hoping that the audience here can give us feedback and start getting more information about. But when people were exposed to these propellants, polyurethanes, various chemicals, particularly you probably noticed, or oftentimes noticed in beauty salons with the propellants and chemicals there, but polyurethanes, the quick stain retardants in shopping centers, malls, on rugs for perhaps even chemicals used to get rid of rodents and bugs and whatever that would come into buildings. I would recognize that. And when patients were exposed to these agents, they would get sicker with chronic fatigue syndrome. It would affect their whole body. These
you think these patients really had chronic fatigue syndrome?
Yes.
or a shadow version?
I think chronic fatigue syndrome likely is a wastebasket of a number of different things, and this is one of them. So they had all the symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome. They were labeled by others in the profession as chronic fatigue syndrome. When they were exposed to these agents, which deposited in their fat and their protein, it just doesn't come and go, but when they got a higher exposure, they would get sicker. If they avoided it for a period of time, it would diminish. You know, would it be days, weeks? The more they avoided it, the little better that they would seem to get.
And John, what would you like our viewers to tell you?
Well, what I would like to know is how prevalent this exposure to the volatile hydrocarbons is.
How many chronic fatigue syndrome
What proportion?
people?
What proportion? Plus, I'd like patients who have this exposure and have chronic fatigue syndrome to get better, to recognize that these agents can make them sick, and perhaps this subsegment of chronic fatigue syndrome patients can get better without medicines by just avoiding them. But I need to tell your audience how to recognize it.
There is very
and
little
how to
history
treat it.
of people actually ever recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome.
And the more it's deposited, like I say, in the protein and fat, but the more they avoid it, the better they get. The way you diagnose it, you can't diagnose it with a blood test. There's no marker. Sometimes the IgE levels might be elevated, the eosinophil level might be elevated in some people, but the best way to do it is exposure, avoidance, re-exposure. Sometimes on accident, sometimes on purpose. But if you get the symptoms and you expose and you avoid the product, and then you re-expose yourself to the propellant spray or the polyurethane or whatever, and you notice you get sicker and you feel worse, you avoid it again. You may do this several times over several months to convince yourself that this is a problem.
Let's ask our viewers for feedback. You can contact us by Gmail at mecfsalert@gmail. You can also contact us on the Facebook page. Tell Dr. Jonathan Shurberg how you react to these volatile carbons, what your experience has been, and whether you believe he is even on the right track. It's certainly interesting and new, and I haven't heard it before. I don't know of any other physician that is taking this line of inquiry. John, would you like to add something?
Well, I'm anxious to hear the results as well. There's certainly the limited time here to speak on this issue, but if it has traction and validity,
we'll come back and we'll tell them what we've learned. Thank you, John, and please be in touch. You can send John your remarks, your experience, and your own conclusions on our Facebook page, MECFS Alert, or on the YouTube where you are watching this, or at our Gmail address, which is MECFS Alert, Gmail. Thank you. Cheers.